Over the past month or so, whilst you have been working on your Squarespace site or making edits, you may have noticed an upgrade button appearing in the top left corner of various sections. Now, I'm sure your curiosity has been getting the better of you and you have been wondering, what does that mean? What will happen if I press it? Am I going to break something if I press it? So in this video, I am going to speak about what it means, what will happen if you click upgrade, and how you can safely and sensibly upgrade your sections. Firstly, if we do hover over this upgrade button, we get a little bit of an explainer from Squarespace. So it tells us upgrade to Fluid Engine for full drag and drop control. Once saved, these sections can't be reverted back to Classic Editor. I think the first thing to go through is what is Classic Editor and what is Fluid Engine. So any section on your Squarespace site where you see this upgrade button is a section that has been built using the Classic Editor. So traditionally we have been building pages and sections on Squarespace by stacking blocks one on top of the other, or clicking and dragging them into positions sort of side by side, and that's always determined by that thick blue line that you can see here, and that lets us know where we can move things. We could also reposition things by clicking the slider or the divider between them, but we were quite tied by the invisible grid that was working in the background. We didn't have a lot of flexibility of where things could be positioned, and that sometimes made it a bit difficult for people to create layouts on Squarespace. I think that's one of the main things I did hear from clients was they tried to move things around and all of a sudden the layout had just gone a bit haywire. Also in Classic Editor, the way we would add blocks is by always looking for this plus icon, and again that thick blue line which would indicate where the new block would land when we added it. So we'd click the plus, that would bring up our block menu, and then we would add an item and it would be full width, and from there we could start to position it. So heading over to a section that's been built within Fluid Engine, we can start to see that there are still blocks, so we hover over these elements and they are still blocks, but they do appear a bit different to what they did within the Classic Editor. First easy thing to notice is that they all have tabs, so that lets you know what type of block it is, so that's quite helpful to identify what you're working with. If we click and start moving one of these blocks around, we can see we have almost infinite freedom as to where it can go. It can go on top of other blocks. You can see here it's gone behind a block. We can pull that up in front. We can also position it right hard up against the side of the page. So you probably wouldn't want to do that with this text block, but you can then pull images right to the side of the page. And you can see here the scrolling block is going right from one side to the other. Also, as I'm clicking on these blocks, these little bounding boxes at every corner let us know that we can resize these blocks. So we can make them wider and we can make them shallower. You might also notice that the plus icon is nowhere to be found for adding blocks. And so the new method for adding a block is this button in the top left. It brings up our block menu as before, and largely they are the same. There are a few differences between how the blocks are represented between Classic Editor and Fluid Engine, but you should find this quite familiar. There are all the same blocks that you will know and have used in the past. But instead of them landing full width as they did before, they'll just land in this top corner, and then you've got the freedom to move that block wherever you want. Another big difference between Classic and Fluid is if we go into our section settings. So this first tab here, Format, looks quite a bit different. The first option here is Grid and Row Count. So once I've opened up this format, we can see this grid in the background, and you will have also seen it when I was moving the blocks around. This grid represents all of the positions where blocks will snap to when you're moving them around. So you can see there's lots and lots of positions, and that's what gives us the freedom of moving our blocks. So this row count determines how many rows of this grid we can see. It can be increased from the menu, and you can see here in the background, or if we come out of that, we can use this slider to drag that section down. And whilst we're here, you can see that grid has disappeared when I'm not in the settings. If we want to see that grid at any time, we can press G on our keyboard, and that brings up the grid and a center line. And that just helps you with positioning things and making sure you've got some consistency with the spacing and positioning of your elements. Heading back into Edit section, we've also got the gap between our grid elements. So by default, we've got no gap, or we've got a gap of 11 pixels. You can customize this and set it to whatever spacing you would like. We can also make our section full screen, which will allow you to have elements flush against the top and bottom of a section. Or we've got our usual padding that we had in our standard classic editor. So if we head back to our original section, and I'll just discard changes for now, there are two ways we can go about working with or experimenting with Fluid Engine. One is to add a new page. So by default, any new page you add will be using the Fluid Engine Builder. Another way to do it is back where we started, using that upgrade button to upgrade an existing section. Before you upgrade an existing section, I recommend creating a duplicate of the page you want to work on. That'll give you the sort of peace of mind to experiment and have a play around, see how you get on, and once you're happy with the newly upgraded sections, you can then swap them over and make the copy the live page. So we'll start by making a copy of this home page. Click the gear icon next to your page, scroll all the way down and select Duplicate Page. And that'll just be renamed as Home Copy. You can give that a name of whatever you would like, just as long as it's obvious to you that it's the copy and not the original. We can then hit Edit to open up the editor. And what we'll start by doing is pressing the Upgrade button. So that'll just refresh your page and it will recreate the elements within that Fluid Engine framework. So I did mention, I think, that there are some blocks that are represented slightly differently within Fluid Engine. And one of those is the image block. So before we hit upgrade, in fact, if I just press back to show you, this section here was using an image block. So if we just keep pressing that, it will just take a minute. So what we had before was an image block, and that is a block that ties together an image, text, and a button. And it was a really handy type of block to give us consistent and easy to manage layouts. Well, unfortunately, they don't exist in Fluid Engine, so if we hit upgrade, you'll see that it has been all split apart. So we've got our text block, our image block, and a button block. But it's okay, we can recreate that section, and it does give us a lot more freedom with customizing it and having full control of the positioning of items. So first thing I would do here is that it has split these two text blocks apart, but I would put them back together. So I'm going to copy the text from this block, click anywhere on the first block, hit return and paste. And just as before, you can pick what style of text you would like. So I think that was a paragraph 1. And then to delete a block, you'll click it first and you can use the bin icon, or as you can see there, you can press delete or backspace and that will delete a block for you. Now we'll look at positioning these elements. So what I do recommend is pressing G on your keyboard to pull up the grid. If we click on our text block, what I would recommend is just making this as small as it can be. So click on the bottom and drag. Now if you find, like I am finding, it won't go any smaller, that's probably just because there's some excess space. So you can see my cursor is landing down here. So I'll click in there and I'll just hit delete. And now I should be able to click and drag. No, I can't. That probably means there's space up above. Yes, there is. So we'll delete that as well. We'll set this back to heading 1. And now we've got our text block with our heading and then our backup statement. Next, we'll position our buttons. So we'll pull that up so it's just below our text block. Now you might think this button looks a little strange, and if we start resizing that button, we can see that it just will kind of move to any size. This is because there is one new setting within the button block. And if we go into our button settings and then design, we can see that there's these two options. One is fit and one is fill. So within Classic Editor, all buttons were set to fit, and that meant they would sort of float within the container, within the block container that they were in. So mostly I still choose that fit setting when I am working on websites. Occasionally fill will be appropriate, but if you select fit, that will ensure you have consistent padding on your buttons, so the space above and below the text and to the left and the right will be consistent across all of your buttons. So I prefer to choose fit unless I really want a button that fits a certain width of a page. So hopefully that makes sense. You can then choose the alignment, so it can be left aligned, right aligned, and that's just as it was previously in Classic Editor. So if we click out, we can just check how this alignment is looking. So I like to count the boxes. We have our image here, and then we have 2 boxes before our text block, and then we have 2 boxes before our button block. So that's looking pretty good. If you find it's uneven, so let's just make this image one bigger, what I would do is either just keep playing around with the adjustment or the positioning of these text and button blocks, or just kind of do the reverse of what I did there. Just pull your image one block shorter so that you've got some even spacing. And then you can get rid of this block, this row here I should say, by using this slider and just pulling that up so it's flush with your block. Now, one very important thing to always remember when you're working with Fluid Engine is to check the mobile view. So in Classic Editor, Squarespace would automatically set up your mobile layout for you. But within Fluid Engine, you do need to make sure that it is working and it looks right yourself. So that is, some say a downside, some say a positive. It does give you a bit more work. It means you have to check all of your pages, but it does give us the freedom to create layouts that work exceptionally well on mobile rather than ones that are just auto-generated by Squarespace. So as we've clicked our mobile view here, we can see our layout doesn't really look brilliant. I think this is a bit narrow for mobile, and I would generally not have these elements sitting side by side. So just as we did with our desktop view, we can click each of our blocks, we can resize them by dragging them into place, and then we can click and we can reposition them. So you'll end up with layouts that look a bit odd during this process, but at the end of it, you should get the result you are happy with. And so we've got something a little bit funky going on here. But what I think I'll do, so this is looking a little odd, and in that case, I am just going to jump back to desktop view. I'm going to save, and I'm just going to refresh and then go back into it. This could just be your average run-of-the-mill glitch with Squarespace. It could be a little Fluid Engine glitch. It could be a glitch because of some coding I have on my back end. So if you ever do get something that looks a little odd, just save your progress and refresh. So we'll head back in and we'll go into our mobile view again. And now we can see we can just fix this little problem that we had. And we'll pull that text so that it's within our grid. You can bring up that grid on mobile as well using the same method, pressing G. And we will make our button full width here. Now you might find that the alignment of your button doesn't work brilliantly on mobile. We can adjust that mobile specific. So if we have our button selected, we'll see our alignment options here. And instead of align horizontally, we can set that to align center. And I think that's going to work better. To remove the spacing at the bottom, just as we did on desktop, we can pull that to whichever we think is going to work best. I think leaving one row on mobile is just going to give that enough space to kind of breathe. And there we have it. So we'll head back to desktop, make sure everything's still looking good there. Happy with that. And as always, once you're happy with your changes, don't forget to save.